Okay, here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1, action.
Assume nothing.
Brash, bald-faced blasphemy.
Question everything.
I find it extremely hard to imagine.
Open your eyes.
It is quite all right to be an atheist.
The fastest growing group of people in the country has been measured as being those who have no belief or who are atheists.
You don't have to be apologetic or quiet about it.
Challenge the opposition.
You see religion on 100 fronts losing the argument.
And start thinking. This is The Thinking Atheist Worldwide.
I've received so much correspondence on this particular show, and the stories are so personal. You know, for people to be so incredibly transparent and to talk about these very intimate parts of their lives, it's really been something to read, and it reminds me of the very human experiences. You know, the non-believer is so often painted as someone without feeling. You know, someone who is jaded and sort of impervious and always on the offense and all of these things, all of these stereotypes. And then you read the stories of people who have been through and maybe are still going through very significant challenges and issues. Another thing I noticed about all the messages, and obviously, again, there are far too many for me to be able to cover in this show, was that they almost qualified part of the show is another edition of the Grief Without God podcast, which was about loss. And I noticed that there was a running trend. So many of the stories were about people who had lost someone dear to them, and they had to cope. They had to move on. And time and again, the religious answers for coping were not really helpful. Maybe they were religious at the time, and they were trying to make sense of it themselves, and it just didn't wash. Or maybe they were already a non-believer, but the believers around them, those with the religious answers, were saying things that were just, they were said with good intentions, but they just weren't helpful. They just weren't helpful. When you try to cope using religion as your crutch, as your way through to make sense of the senseless, I can see where in the short run it might give comfort. It was 1986, I think. A buddy of mine, we worked at one of my first jobs as a teenager was at McDonald's. And I honestly think fast food or retail or some service job should be part of everybody's resume. I think it teaches you a lot about, as a kid, I learned how to deal with people and learned how to punch a clock and learned how to be accountable. And believe it or not, it was freaking hard work sometimes. Back there in the grill, you're scrubbing the floors and washing dishes and all that stuff for the hefty wage of $3.35 an hour. Whew, I was loaded. And Tim worked there as well. And, he's kind of a geeky dude. He wasn't one of those uber popular guys. He was kind of tall and lanky, and he was a follower. You find those people who are always looking to latch on. They're almost like a puppy dog. They're like, pay attention to me, notice me, please, hang out with me. And that's what Tim was like. And he's just an affable guy, just picture this skinny, 6 foot tall, about 103 pound dude. And he and I became kind of buddies. And after we'd finish work, sometimes we'd go down to, there's a truck stop down the road and go play a pinball or whatever. We'd go and we just hung out. Back then I didn't have to sleep. I was a teenager. I didn't require the, back then I could just keep going. And we'd close, get out of there at 1 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday night and still be ready to go do something else. And we became kind of pals. Not fast friends, not best friends, but buddies. It was New Year's Eve, and I knew he was going to a party, and I wasn't really the partying type. This was back when I was still pretty, I was the poster child for clean living for a good Christian boy. It wasn't really party material. Certainly wasn't invited. And so we were supposed to meet at the McDonald's we worked at, just meet in the parking lot and then go hang out. It was going to be late. And I showed up. I think it was, I can't even really remember the time. It was late. We were pushing the midnight hour. And Tim didn't show up. I'm hanging out. And finally I walk in and manager's there. They're working with the skeleton crew. They're kind of just cleaning up the store. This is, I don't know, McDonald's, they still close, right? Yeah. They're not 24 hours. And they closed anyway. This one did. And so I went in my street clothes, just waiting for Tim, and grab a mop, and I just helped him close up the store. And I don't know how long I was in there. It must have been an hour. And nothing. And this is before cell phones. So, it's not like I could just go, hey, where you at? We just didn't have that option. And we locked up, and I sat in the parking lot for another few minutes, and I took my little Mazda truck, and I went back home. At the time, I still lived with my folks. It's well after midnight. It's probably 1 o'clock something in the morning. And when I walked in the house, my whole family was sitting up in the living room waiting for me. And you know that feeling when you're about to, when this is not good, whatever they're about to say. And everybody's kind of, they didn't really know Tim, but they had gotten the news. I don't even remember how they found out. I think maybe Tim's mom called the house. I don't know. They had heard the news that Tim and a buddy, both co-workers, driving a pickup truck. I guess they were either going to or from the party. And they're up at it's kind of an incline, kind of a dirt road kind of deal, and there was some ice. And the truck had slid and slipped right off the road and tumbled down the hill. And both guys' names were Tim, by the way. One was, where Tim, my buddy, was kind of an affable, genial guy. The other guy was Mr. Popular, but they were in the same truck, and they were both in the emergency room. They were both admitted to the hospital in ICU in a coma. And I go in, and they tell me, the reason Tim didn't come to meet you is because he was in a car accident. And he's fighting for his life. He's in a coma. And I'm just shocked. I'm thinking, what? And I didn't weep or anything like that. I was just mostly it was adrenaline. It was shock. It was, wow. And I think I called up to the hospital and I got Tim's dad on the phone. And he was stolid. He was very much on autopilot. He was giving a few facts, but he was not, I don't think he was dealing. How could a parent deal? And when I think I went up the following day, the day after, they had Tim in ICU, and so they allowed us to go in. They had to have stabilized him, so it had been a few days. And I went in to see him in ICU, and you know how it is when you walk into a hospital room or an ICU or an emergency room, and someone is hooked up to all of these accoutrements, all of these tubes and wires and machines, and they don't really look or seem like themselves. It was really like that. It just seemed like somebody else. I knew it was him. And he had these red tennis shoes on. I guess they're his favorite tennis shoes. So his dad had put these shoes on him. So here he is. He's in a hospital gown, totally unconscious, in a coma, and he's got these red shoes on. And his father's talking to him, as they say you should speak to someone in a coma because they can supposedly hear you. And I don't know if that's true or not. It might be just as much for the people who are in the room waiting as it is for anybody. But Tim's dad would say, when you wake up, pal, we're going to go fishing, aren't we, pal? And he'd reach over and he'd touch his leg. And there was a lot of, touch his hand, just touch his head, kiss him, just continue to make contact. And Tim lasted 2 weeks in ICU before he finally died. So he's my age. He's 18. And I went to the funeral. I was a pallbearer, and it was at a Catholic church. I'd never been inside a Catholic church before. And of course, they're all genuflecting as they go in to be seated. I don't know what the hell they're doing. I don't know what they're doing. And we hear the usual song and dance about how Tim is in a better place and all of that. And I myself couldn't really make sense of he went to a better place. And I was pretty young and wasn't really processing. I think I actually wrote down my thoughts at the time. Why did this happen? Why, God? Why, God? Why, God, would you do this? Why would you take him? And in retrospect, I'm looking back to 1985 and I'm thinking, 1986, I'm thinking I was struggling to cope with the loss of a friend, using a rule book that was based on fantasy. I mean, imagine if I had known then what I know now. Imagine if I had not tried to, I didn't see a puppet master with the strings, with his finger on the button. Or either that or he was the omnipotent deity who just decided not to intervene on Tim's behalf and not save his life. For whatever reason, his ways are not our ways. It was obviously God's timing. Whatever. So here I am racked with just questions. Heartbroken, thinking, what? What plan is this? And I prayed and sought comfort with my God. And looking back, I think to myself, I'm just talking to myself. What if I thought about the real solutions for grieving? This was a senseless accident. It was a freak thing. It happened. No one saw it coming. I don't know if it's anybody's fault. No one, the other Tim did not survive. Neither of the boys lived. And so no one knows what happened that night. They just came upon the accident scene. They have no idea who was at fault, what, I don't know. But if I had realized at that time that, shit happens. Life gets very difficult sometimes, but it's real life. Would it have been easier to sort of crawl through that, What about his family? I see them they're in their Catholic church, listening to the priest talk about all of these things, these reasons, these spiritual connotations to what happened. Imagine if it would have been, I don't know how you recover from the loss of a child, but is it truly healthy to overcome that by believing that you will be reunited someday? Is that fantasy really a healthy way? One day Tim will be standing at the pearly gates. When I die, at whatever age I die, I will see him again, and we will hug and we will catch up, and there will be laughter and no tears, no sadness whatsoever. And so that fantasy carries you through. Is that a healthy way to cope? What about overcoming other things? People who have been abused as young people or as adults. They carry those scars, emotional scars, possibly physical scars with them, and they're trying to get through. There's a church on every corner in my city, and there's a huge phenomenon that you see. They have signs right out on the street, and these programs are often called Celebrate Recovery or something along the lines of Celebrate Recovery, and it's about people who are recovering from divorce or family trauma, or abuse, or whatever, addiction. And they they bring these people in. And because they have these signs out front, they're obviously trying to attract, even though many of those who don't even attend or are aware the church exists. I'm sure they're hoping someone's driving by who's right at the rock bottom of their lives. I've tried to beat this addiction my whole life. I'm in the gutter. I have nothing. I'm at my wit's end, and they drive by and they see a church, right? The symbol of hope, and they see a sign that says, "Come celebrate recovery." And they bring those people in, and they wrap their arms around them, and they do love them. I mean, they will embrace them in every way they can and just say, "What can we do?" They're operating in good faith because they believe that the answer is a spiritual answer. Then they provide solutions based in Scripture. Are they truly qualified to deal with someone who is desperate to escape addiction or to overcome the damage done by an abusive parent or spouse? Is good intention enough? Are they doing more damage than good? And for those who do overcome without religion, how do they do it? What's their secret? What merit is there to just walking away from all of the lofty speech about God's love for us? We can do all things through Christ. We are overcomers. We will climb the mountain. We can move mountains. All of that stuff. The stuff that sounds good until the emotions wear down and you have to face the real world situation that you were in an hour and a half ago before the service started, and nothing really has changed. I'm going to share your stories and your phone calls. I've got as many emails here as I'll try to get in, and your calls. But first, I want to speak with a special guest. He has been on the show before with me, and he's just a fantastic guy. His name is Dr. Darrel Ray. He's a writer and speaker on leadership and organizational development. He's author of a couple of books on the topic. He's author of The God Virus, How Religion Affects Our Lives and Culture, and the book Sex and God, How Religion Distorts Sexuality. He's also founder and chairman of the board of Recovering from Religion, and he got his doctorate in psychology over at Peabody College at Vanderbilt University. Dr. Darrel Ray, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thanks for having me on again, Seth.
Talk to me about overcoming without religion. I mean, we always hear people talk about relying on their faith in times of trouble and times of need. I had the loss of a loved one, or I'm overcoming addiction, or I've got this challenge in my personal or professional life baggage that I'm carrying with me, and my higher power was there to get me through. But for the non-believer, they don't have that particular crutch. And I thought it might be something that you would want to speak to. You've probably heard people say that, right? I mean, if it wasn't for God, I wouldn't have gotten through it, right?
Right. Well, if it wasn't for their own brain, they wouldn't have gotten through it. That's the real kicker, because there's no little God living inside their head, and they're not praying to anybody but their own brain. So they got themselves out. The problem is, especially once you leave religion, is you no longer think you have a crutch. I mean, religious people think they have a crutch, and it's called a God, Jesus or Holy Spirit or whatever they pray to. Well, that thought itself has some value in that it gives you a place to put the blame, if you will, to focus your attention. But it takes the attention off of the real issue. And that's why people who use their faith to get through mental illness or major issues in their life oftentimes take longer, and it's much more difficult because they're not dealing with the root cause, which is oftentimes crazy thinking. I mean, people get themselves emotionally in trouble because of their crazy thinking. They think the world should act a certain way, and the world doesn't act that way. Well, if you continue in your delusion that the world should have a God in it, and God should respond to my prayers, you're going to waste a hell of a lot of time and energy.
What would you say to those who take a more passive approach? They say, well, look, if someone goes to an AA meeting and they invoke a higher power to help them beat addiction, and it inspires them and makes them feel good, what harm does it do?
Well, first of all, there's no evidence that AA works. Now, there's lots of people that claim it works, but there's no scientific evidence that shows that AA does anything. except give you a place to go, waste more time. The focus is not on you. The focus is on something else. I mean, there's several aspects of AA that are all God-focused. Well, all we're trying to say, it's in my work in starting the Secular Therapist Project, I'm trying to give people an option for finding therapists, finding people that can help them work through their problems without some fantasy, some invisible friend that they have to talk to or pray to. You could say, well, it doesn't harm anything, but I would argue with that. If you're bleeding and you decide, well, I'm going to go take a trip by the church to pray to God before you go to the hospital, it does harm something. You're losing blood while you're on the way to the hospital. Well, if you're losing mental energy, you're losing focus. If you're praying to God, you're not looking at the thinking problems that got you in the spot in the first place. Let's say you're having relationship problems and you pray to God about the relationship problems. Well, that's probably not going to help you figure out what's causing that relationship problem, because you're looking at Jesus. You're not looking at your behavior. You're not looking at the way you think about relationships. And maybe you frankly got some crazy ideas about how relationships should work. The world should be perfect. Marriage should be happily ever after. And, those kinds of thought patterns people get. And once they get in their heads, they have a hard time getting rid of them. And they're dysfunctional. They don't help you deal with real world problems. So I would really disagree with the passive person. I think it does harm in the same way that if you're bleeding significantly, you wouldn't stop by the church to pray to Jesus. And if you're having marriage problems, you shouldn't stop by the minister to get some pastoral counseling about marriage. You should go straight to the person who knows how to help you deal with your thinking process.
Was it Robert Greene Ingersoll who said, the more false we destroy, the more we make room for the true?
Yeah.
And, some people say, well, if it makes them feel good and it's even a happy placebo sometimes brings benefit. And of course, the argument against that is, well, isn't that a huge distraction? I mean, shouldn't you be seeking tangible answers somewhere?
Exactly. Why are you wasting your time and energy when you can have a much fuller life? There's a lot of things that we were taught as children that we learned later simply aren't true. I mean, there's no Santa Claus. Most adults know that by now. But there's a lot of other things around how relationships should work or how you should think about the world that adults carry into their everyday life. And these thinking, a lot of issues get down to how people were taught, what they were taught, and the crazy ideas they were taught about interpersonal relationships and mental health and religious input into that. I mean, pray to God and you'll get over your depression. You ain't going to get through your depression by praying to God. You're going to get through your depression in one of two ways generally. You're going to change the way you think about the depressing events that got you there, or you're going to get some drugs that help you get chemical balance back in your brain so you can think more clearly about the depressing events that got you there. So those are the only two things that are going to happen. If you pray during that time, it's just another distraction. If you think Jesus is going to help you, it's just taking energy away from the thing you really should be doing. I mean, I don't know how many times years ago when I was doing a lot of clinical work, I would have people come into me and say, I'm praying. I went to my minister and got counseling about marriage. And he said, well, I should pray for my spouse more. Well, okay, pray for your spouse more while he's beating you. Pray for your spouse more when he's not paying his child support if you're separated. That's not going to do a lot of good. You need to do something concrete. You need to think clearly. And mental illness is a difficult condition because you're easily fooled. It's hard to see that you're experiencing a mental illness. Most depressed people don't know they're depressed, especially in the early stages. They just think, oh, I'm going through a bad time. Well, once you've gotten into depression, praying about it's probably not going to help a darn bit, except take you farther away from getting help when you need it.
Talking here with Dr. Darrel Ray. You mentioned the Secular Therapist Project, which was the big reason I wanted to talk to you. Now, let's address the root problem. That people who go get therapy for some reason or seek counseling from a licensed professional or whoever, and this isn't necessarily a church-based therapist, right? This could be someone just out there that they found in the phone book. There is a problem with people who still create supernatural solutions as part of their therapy. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's the big concern that I found actually just over the last year or so, as I was writing my latest book, Sex and God, I was getting all this information. I was doing a lot of research for the book, and I would get calls, I'd get emails from people saying, I need some help finding a therapist. And that was part of what I was researching for the book, was stuff around psychotherapy and what goes on around sexual dysfunction and stuff like that. Well, lo and behold, I found out it's hard to find a secular therapist. It's hard to find a therapist that doesn't have some kind of New Age or Christian or religious ideology in their head.
Well, give me a specific. I mean, if I go in because I'm depressed or because my marriage is on the rocks or because I'm struggling with all of these emotional issues from my childhood, and I go and I'm on the therapist couch and I'm spilling out my problems, what are the kind of things they tell a patient?
Well, you don't know. A lot of therapists will be very competent about it, and they'll never say anything about religion. But the problem is there are a lot of them that will, and you can't tell the difference. You walk into their office, and 3 weeks later, they advise you to go back to church. Well, the first 2 weeks, they seem to be perfectly fine. But the third week, they ask you to go back to church. I mean, we've actually had that kind of a thing happen.
Well, that's a lot of billable hours that I'd like to have known about in advance before they played the God card, you know. Exactly. And that's what we're trying to ameliorate. You cannot go in the Yellow Pages or go online and find a therapist that you can be reasonably sure will never pull a New Age stunt on you, like you need to align your chakras or you need to get in touch with the universe, or some Christian thing, you need to pray to Jesus more, you need to go back to church. Right now, many people don't realize, but Liberty University and Regents University and George Fox University, these incredibly conservative fundamentalist universities, are graduating people with degrees in marriage and family counseling. They're licensable. And you cannot necessarily see if those people, are going to use their training for religious purposes or not. Well, frankly, if they graduate from one of those, they're probably going to. There's not much doubt there. But there are probably more people being graduated in those fundamentalist religious programs right now than there are secular therapists being graduated with PhDs in psychology in the United States. So the market is getting flooded with Christian counselors. A friend of mine in Atlanta says you can find 3 Christian counselors on every block, and you can't find a overtly secular therapist anywhere in the city. And the reason for that is if a secular therapist came right out and said, I'm an atheist or I'm a humanist, half of their clients would leave because their clients themselves are religious and they don't want to go to an atheist therapist. So it's dangerous to actually advertise as a therapist. They have to hide. They have to keep their head low. And so it's hard to find them. That's why I started the Therapist Project. It's like a dating site. It's like Match.com or eHarmony. I don't get your email. You don't get my email. But you can find me through the Secular Therapist website. And you can tell that I'm somewhere in your area, I'm within 50 miles of you. And then you can email me through our system and ask me, can I do the kind of therapy that I need? And I'll say yes or no. And we'll go back and forth through our system, so nobody knows anybody's phone number or address or email. And then when we decide we're ready to move forward, then we can step outside of our system and make the appointment and have a face-to-face meeting. Well, how does the Secular Therapist Project vet these people? I mean, is there a certain criteria they must meet, obviously, before you're sort of a liaison for them?
Yeah, that's a great question, Seth. There's 4 of us that are all secular therapists. And I mean, these folks are actively involved in very secular events like American Atheist and stuff like that. But the 4 of us all look at every candidate. If somebody applies to be admitted to our database, we look them over. We look at their website. We look at the information they submit. If we've got questions, we'll email them, ask them questions. And then we all 4 vote. And we don't know how anybody else is going to vote. So all 4 of us are voting very independently. And if they get 4 votes out of 4, then we let them into the project. If they get 3 out of 4, then we want to know what the question is, and we'll continue our dialogue with that person. And
then if I ended up going to the therapist and let's say he asked me to align my chi or something, I could then contact you and say, hey, Houston, we have a problem here, and you guys would be open to that, right?
Absolutely,
Okay.
Absolutely. But, the nice thing is the opposite has actually happened. We've had 2 different clients, people who are in therapy right now, recommend their therapist come to us and register. So 2 of the 45 or so therapists that we've got right now came from clients, which is cool because, I mean, that's a pretty good recommendation. These are atheist clients saying my therapist does a good job with me. And I think one of those 2 is a somewhat religious therapist. We're not disqualifying somebody as a therapist if they are religious. What we want to do is make sure they know how to keep religion out of their therapy for anybody that comes through our system. And if they are religious, they're going to have to convince us. We don't just roll over and play dead for that.
What is the website?
They can go to seculartherapy, all one word, .org. seculartherapy.org.
Let's talk for a moment about therapy. I don't really know a lot about it. I mean, I come from a culture where if you've got a problem, most of the people I know, they go talk to a pastor, right? Or they go talk to a buddy.
You came from a religious mindset, and
I mean,
a lot
it was come go see your counselor or pastor and get prayed for.
Yeah, right. And there's a lot of religions that are very, very suspicious of psychologists and psychotherapists, specifically Jehovah's Witnesses and Scientologists. They forbid you to go to those 2, go to any mental health professional because I think mental health is only a God's purview. So we're learning more and more about the human brain all the time. We know more about the chemistry of the brain. We know about the balance, chemical balance in the brain. We know from MRIs how the brain communicates within itself. I mean, even just the last year or so, we've got these beautiful pictures of the wiring. It almost looks like wiring if you look at these MRI scans, how the brain is communicating with itself. And we can actually see when certain parts of the brain are or are not communicating with one another. We can even see in some cases where chemicals like dopamine or serotonin are not being produced in the proper amounts, which changes the ability of the brain cells to communicate with each other. Well, there's no God can help you change that, and no pastor's ever been trained in that kind of stuff. A psychotherapist, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, they've been trained in this kind of stuff. And they're trained to help you work through whatever issues got you in this place in the first place, and to spot things that might need a chemical intervention, like some kind of drugs for depression or compulsive behavior or something like that. I mean, just talk to the person who has a compulsive behavior and ask them how many times they've tried to stop, or ask a smoker. I mean, somebody who smokes, ask them how many times have you tried to stop, and it's pretty obvious. It's very difficult to do this yourself. You need some help, and you need some help from somebody that knows what they're doing. A priest and a minister does not know what they're doing. And quite frankly, they can go to school all they want, but as long as they still think prayer's an option, I would disagree with their ability to help you. But you also need to talk about things. And, Seth, it's nothing wrong with going and talking to your buddy. That's a very good first option for anybody. I mean, I got friends. If I got problems, I'd say, let's go have supper, and I'll cry to them for an hour or 2, and I feel better at the end. And they may give me some good ideas to deal with whatever I'm dealing with. And that's perfectly legitimate. In fact, it's pretty therapeutic. But for a chronic problem, for something that I've tried, I've talked to let's say I've talked to my buddy 5 times about this and it's not getting better, then that's probably a good sign that I need to probably find somebody that's got some training in this. One of the key kinds of therapies, and I don't want to come off as pushing any specific type of therapy, but there's only a few therapies that have been scientifically validated. There's dozens of different theories about how you do psychotherapy, but there's only a handful that have had rigorous scientific testing. And that's what we look for in people applying to be our therapists in our databases. Are these people trained in those therapies that are most scientifically valid? Cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, is one of the most scientifically tested theories over the last 30 years, and it stood up to the test in almost every situation. So what we know is you can use one kind of therapy to get out of depression. You can use another kind of therapy to work with marital problems. I mean, there's a selection. It's like a toolbox. A mechanic gets in his toolbox and selects a tool that's going to work for a specific problem he's repairing his car. Well, that's kind of the way a therapist does. A therapist hears what kind of a problem you're dealing with, and they might suggest, let's try some cognitive therapy, or let's try some flooding, or let's try some hypnosis. There's a number of different possible tools in the toolbox.
I'm sure as complex as the human mind is, and as complex as each individual circumstance is, I guess the idea of just throwing one specific catch-all at it is just pretty ludicrous.
And that's what you've got in a religion. It's a one-size-fits-all box. Now, the problem is that even a good therapist isn't going to talk you out of whatever it is sometimes. So they need to have enough knowledge, wisdom to say, okay, I think we need to refer you to a psychiatrist to get some meds. We'll continue to the talk therapy. What the science shows is talk therapy works pretty darn good if it's cognitive oftentimes, and chemical therapy with drugs for things like depression works pretty good. But if you put them both together, they work far better than either one individually. So you need a therapist that's trained enough to know that, okay, it's time for you to get some drugs for this depression, and let's keep talking. Or you don't sound depressed enough, or this isn't chronic enough. Let's not go the drug route. Let's try another month or two before we go that route.
To put a bow on it, though, I mean, it's more effective, it's more gratifying, more satisfying, and probably more concrete to beat whatever it is that you're faced with, whatever you're challenged with, outside of the religious construct. I mean, in the real world, facing real problems with real solutions, you know, it doesn't sound necessarily as happy when you say it out loud. There's not an all-seeing eye in the sky who bathes you in his warmth as you come out of alcoholism or depression or abuse or whatever. But I mean, ultimately, the solutions without superstitious stories attached to them are more satisfying. I mean, it's something you yourself can own, right? And take responsibility for.
Absolutely. Because, you know, if you own it, you're less likely to go back, to slide back into it. You know where you got the cure from. You got it from yourself. You got it from changing your thinking. You got it from changing a behavior pattern. If you blame Jesus, and I mean blame in the sense that he got you out of this, then Jesus can get you back into it too. And that's the problem. If you think Jesus got you out of your alcoholism, well, the minute you stop going to church, you're going to slide back into alcoholism, or you could well slide back into it. If you think Jesus got you and your wife back together and now you're happy, the minute you and your wife stop going to church, or she becomes an atheist and you aren't, you know, you're liable to slide back. So if you don't take ownership for your own problems, you leave yourself open to going back to where you came from.
Check out the website, the Secular Therapist Project. The website is seculartherapy.org. Dr. Darrel Ray, my chi feels aligned now that you and I have spent these precious moments in therapy together. Honestly, I saw a special with I don't even remember who it was, and you know, someone had a problem and they laid them out on a big table under some colored crystals, and you know, they're burning the candles, and the whole time I think, you know, I'm watching ceremony, I'm not watching any solutions here. So to hear somebody just give us some common sense good stuff is really refreshing. I wish you the best with the project. We'll send everybody that way to. I mean, you don't have to have therapy to go and at least check it out, maybe recommend it. We all know somebody who's going through something.
And there's an alternative too. If people get online and they know somebody needs help, get them there. Tell them to go look. And if there's nobody in your zip code or anywhere close, there's still people in our database that will do therapy by way of Skype or by phone. So don't give up just because there's nobody sitting right next door.
Seculartherapy.org. Dr. Darrel Ray, thanks so much for your time. We'll talk to you soon, bro.
You're welcome. Thanks, Seth. Good to talk to you again.
I had an email from Joe. Joe said, I wanted to contribute a short experience that also told me who my friends truly were. I was never baptized, was never a subscriber of religion, and I thought most in my circle of friends were too. In 2005, after a completely normal, no issues whatsoever pregnancy, 1 week before my due date, my second child died in utero from a sudden umbilical cord collapse. My son was born in a silent delivery room with sad faces all around. He was perfect in every way to look at. It was unbelievable to me. His birth went so wrong. So I went home with my partner without the baby and began the process of answering the phone calls and visits from people who heard I was home from the hospital but had no idea I didn't bring a baby home with me. That's when my opinions of people I had known for years completely changed. I was told God must have had a special plan for your son. God's will causes us pain on earth, but don't worry, when you die, you'll be reunited. You shouldn't be sad. You're so selfish. Your son is with Jesus. And of course, I'll pray for you. To which I would answer, what will you pray for? Because I was seriously curious. And usually the silence would be deafening. They were used to saying it and having people say thank you. My partner was amazingly supportive, and the people who were my actual friends kicked my depressed butt out of bed and made me get back into life. My partner inspired me to create about 30 paintings of the horrible feelings I was having and the loss and the anger and get rid of it in the paintings. It worked. Some other friends got together and bought me an exotic rose bush to remember my son and helped me plant it. It worked. Another good friend suggested I donate time to talk to other women who had experienced a stillbirth, and she was right. I would know better than most how it feels to come home from the hospital without a baby as I'd planned to do for all those months. It worked. None of these people offered to pray for me. They helped me, human to human, friend to friend. Joe said, I came to the conclusion rather quickly some of my so-called friends were lazy, and I didn't know some people as well as I thought I did. It made me more outspoken than ever towards basically delusional people. I got called angry and in pain and told I needed to hand it over to Jesus. A little over 1 year later, I welcomed a healthy baby boy into the world, and life got really good again. I do miss the child I didn't get a chance to raise. Almost daily I have a passing thought, but I'm not depressed or angry. I feel loss, sure, but I feel I'm in a healthy place about the experience, and I do my best to pay it forward and help other women or couples that just need to talk and vent and need an understanding ear. My so-called praying friends? I removed them from my address book and have continued building a family of creative, open-minded people that do things and don't just wait on their imaginary friend to make things better. Thanks for reading and keeping open minds, Joe. Joe, thank you so much for the letter. I've had someone ask me if I've ever felt insulted when someone says, I'll pray for you. Now, normally in my circles, it's in the context of we had a disagreement about an argument or a topic we were dealing with. I was talking to an apologist of some level, and we were going over some of the arguments that you and I hear so often. And when we come to a moment of impasse, they look at me and say, well, I'll pray for you, which is kind of a condescending way to get them out of the room. But I also know that I'll pray for you is a way for people to... It's like they don't know what else to do. They don't know what else to say. They don't necessarily have a solution. I'm honestly convinced that very few people who say, I will pray for you, actually go and pray for you. It's a reassuring word. To them, it feels like they're giving you something. At least the reassurance that you care enough to pray, whether you do or not. Maybe you're just acting, I don't know. But when someone says, I pray for you, I'll pray for you in this difficult time, I'll pray for you, and you're a non-believer, does it piss you off? You get mad and say, what an insult. You know I don't believe in this. You know I consider your prayers to an invisible deity, an unprovable supreme dictator, useless and void and fantasy. So why would you tell me you're going to go talk to him on my behalf? Does it make you mad when people say that to you? I'll pray for you. Your spouse was in a car wreck. I'll pray for you. I'll pray for you both. One of your kids is sick. I'll pray for him. I'll pray for her. How does it make you feel when they do that? I'd be curious. Area code 586. You are on the Thinking Atheist radio podcast. Thanks for your patience on hold. Who is this?
This is Darrel. How you doing, Seth?
Darrel, I'm glad you called. Thanks for waiting. What do you have for us?
I know I enjoyed Dr. Darrel Ray. Always great to hear him. I kind of wish here a story I'm actively coping with without God. But it goes back 10 years when I was a fundamentalist, evangelical, Holy Spirit-filled, fire-baptized Christian. And my grandpa had his about 7th surgery. He had Parkinson's. I was very, very close to him and my grandma. And 3 days before he passed, I had this amazing experience with him where I went in to see him at the hospital, and it was after hours, and they let me in to see him, and he just, like, snapped out. They said, you know, he was not doing well that day, and when I got there, he snapped too, and, you know, he normally was forgetting a lot of things, you know, but he remembered, like, everything about my life. We had talked for about an hour and asking me about all these great things, and it was really touching that this hour we spent together, and it was the last hour I spent with him alive. And I remember leaving and thinking, like, wow, Jesus perked him up because this is going to be the last time I'm going to talk to him. And I just had this feeling in my spirit, you know how we always say that, that this was going to be the last time I talked to him. And it ended up being that 2 days later, my mom called me and said he had passed and that everyone was headed to the hospital. So I head to the hospital, and he, you know, had passed, and there's, you know, 60 of us packed in this room because we're a big Italian family, and packed in the, you know, local Catholic hospital, and everyone was so sad. And I remember when my mom told me the news, how excited I was that he was finally with Jesus, and that there is no sadness to be gained here. This is just a joyous moment at his passing, because he really was going through a lot, especially with his Parkinson's and his second bout with cancer. And the funeral, I never cried once, I never cried after, and I was terribly close to my grandfather. I loved him dearly. And, you know, I became an atheist probably about 5-6 years ago, and now my grandmother is on the verge of going. I mean, I would say she has 3 months to live. And the last couple of years have been amazing, because I've really learned, when you really realize this is the only life we probably have, it becomes apparent how important the time is. And I really felt like I've used the last 3 or 4 years, you know, to my advantage to really get to know her stories and just listen to her and spend time with her. And, you know, recently, you know, now she's got home care and everything, and every time I've left, it's been really hard, and I've been crying. Like, every time I leave, I get in the car and I just start bawling. And it's something I've never had to deal with before. This is the first close person who's died, or who is going to be dying soon in my family, where I don't have God to lean on. And, you know, she sits there and looks at me and says, you know, I can't wait to see your grandfather and give him a hug when I get up there and all this stuff. And it's tough because she knows I'm an atheist. She asked me a year ago if I don't believe in God anymore, and I told her the truth, and she was pretty cool about it. But she still, every time she sees me, says, you know, I pray every day that you're going to come back to the one true holy Catholic and Apostolic Church before you die, Darrell. I know it. I just know it. Well, and, I mean, she's convinced of that, by the way.
You know, when a little old lady says she's going to pray for you, my money would be that she's praying every day.
I know she is.
Those little gray-haired ladies, man, they are on their knees praying. Just like, well, look, you just admitted to me, though, that when you had the belief that your grandfather's passing was sort of cloaked in Jesus. He was lucid for that hour so that he could be with you when he went to heaven. And you didn't cry, but you felt joy. But now, based in reality, now you feel grief and pain and tears. So some might say from the outside in, well, actually having the belief in the afterlife, having the belief in religion was better. How would you defend the reality-based approach to how you're going to be dealing with death this next time around?
Well, I'd say it to you differently probably than I'd say it to somebody else, but there's a lot of comfort in delusion.
No, I buy that. I totally get it.
You know, it's so easy to deal with it when you know, or when you believe that the person you love is getting that second life where there's no pain and no harm and no cancer and no Parkinson's and no bills and, you know, no crutches and dribbling on your chin and you know, where you're just sitting there with the good Lord. And, you know, it was and now it's I would say to someone who asked me, I would say, it's harder because I believe. I wouldn't say I know with absolute certainty, but I would say that I know that these moments are so precious. And now I do feel this loss, as like selfish loss of my grandmother that's coming up, probably in the next couple of weeks or months when she goes. And when I look at her face and I see that sunken in look, and I know it's getting closer and closer, it just becomes harder and harder. And life's not supposed to be easy. And I don't think that, deluding myself with the notions, the delusions of grandeur with Christ and all that, it does make it harder. Life isn't easier because life is much harder as an unbeliever. I would tell anybody, But it's just amazing how different this experience has been, because she's the first person who's been really close to me who's died while I'm a non-believer, and it's pretty devastating.
Well, you've really articulated it as well as anybody, I think, that every precious second we have should be maximized. I'm working on I just finished it actually, and I'm posting it on this Saturday, which is June the 23rd, a project that's been near and dear to my heart that I've sort of kept on the back burner since last year, called Afterlife. And it talks about how do you have a meaningful life without an afterlife. And without spilling the beans here too much, I mean, you really hit a lot of the nail on the head that we got one shot. And sure, it's going to be more painful with the reality that we won't be reunited. But at the same time, it is I'd rather deal with a reality-based grief than a happy fantasy, and I totally buy that. So,
yeah, thanks a lot for your show and everything like that. Some of your episodes have been really just amazing. I get to listen to my iPod at work, so I've listened to probably every episode now, and I'm just really thankful for you and thankful for your show, and have a great show.
I appreciate you. Thanks so much for being a part of it.
Thanks, Seth. Bye.
He should host this this episode. He just articulates it so well. I've often said I would rather live a difficult reality than a happy fantasy. I would rather deal with a hard truth than an easy lie, even a comforting lie. Is it healthy to fake yourself out? Is that truly the healthy way through a difficult time? Area code 214. Thanks for waiting. You're on the Thinking Atheist podcast. Who is this?
I think it's me, Devin.
Devin, appreciate your patience. What's going on?
Thank you very much for having me on the show, man. I'm a recent listener of your show. I've past 3 weeks. I've been up here in Kansas doing work for my grandmother.
Thank you.
I've been out in the field listening to your show all day, man. I love your show, and I love to know that there's other atheists out there like myself that get through day-to-day life. When I was in middle school-ish, and still kind of now, I used to get bullied a lot, and it was bad, kind of bad, and I was very, very depressed, and I was actually suicidal at one point in time for a while. And at that time, I was born to a religious family. I was raised religiously, kind of, and I was, had all that church stuff there, and I went to church every now and again. And I remember people, after I said to my parents that I was, depressed and suicidal and stuff like that, and they didn't get me any help. They got me to church, and that wasn't much help.
Wait, you just went to your mom and your dad and you said, I have thoughts about killing myself? Yeah,
because that's what I thought that was the smart thing to do.
How old were you at the time?
I was 13.
Well, what'd they do? I can't imagine a parent, their child comes to them and says, there are times when I think about killing myself. What did they do and say?
They kind of tapped me down and they talked to me a little while, and then we went to see our pastor.
And the pastor, what, he opened the Bible and went down that road?
Pretty much. He was like, oh, everything's okay. Jesus loves you.
Now, what's going on in your mind, though, as he's giving you the Jesus loves you and you are a child of the King speech? Were you buying it at the time, or was it satisfying to you?
I said I was buying it. I told myself I should believe it. I said to myself, well, Jesus loves me. I'm a good person. I should move on. But really, I was thinking I'm not feeling any better. This is nothing. It's just, it's not helping. And a tough time. I got into high school, and I, got my confidence up and all that, and started making a lot more friends, and that whole depression thing went away. I'm still being bullied every night, but I don't really care about that anymore because.
You sound like a happy guy. It sounds like you really bounced back, though, right?
Oh, yeah. I totally bounced back, but I did it completely on my own. I had, maybe one real friend, and technically, I mean, if you were to ask my parents, they'd say I did it through Jesus, of course, but I didn't.
Well, there's nothing like, was it the supportive friends, or was it that you just pulled up your bootstraps and shored yourself up and made it happen for yourself, or both?
I decided that I should just stop caring about what people said about me and to me, and I did that, and I told myself that I was awesome, and I started believing it. And when you start believing that you're awesome, everyone around you starts believing that you're awesome.
Devin, we all know you're awesome. Everybody in the chat room, everybody right now knows that you are awesome. You just ooze it.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate the call. That's awesome to hear from you, and I'm glad your story had a happy ending. Take care of yourself.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your show. I'm going to continue listening forever, and I just want to thank everyone else out listening for giving me this community that I could actually talk to about my religion, because, I'm the only atheist in my whole family.
I know exactly what that's like, and that's exactly what the community is here for, to connect everybody and support each other and to just keep us all sane. So I'm really glad to hear you say it.
Thank you very much.
All right, take care, brother. I love hearing about people who, can engage, whether it's in the forums online or in the Facebook page where they connect with each other. I took some heat. We had somebody come into the Facebook page. There was we sort of, when someone posts one of my videos or blogs, or there's some sort of excitement about the atheist, the thinking atheist, and it's on a religious page, or there's an article in the Christian Post, or it's on a Christian blog or something, you'll see a spike in activity from religious people on our Facebook page. Now, I don't use the ban hammer very often. As an admin, I really feel like, disagreement is welcome. What I don't abide is when the theists come by to do that drive-by, that bumper sticker regurgitation of the same old tired hackneyed arguments that we've already heard and rebutted time and time again. These people who just cruise on by and say, Jesus loves you, and if you don't repent, have fun in hell. And it's always in all caps, and then they're just gone, And they come back and they'll throw something else out. Where are the transitional fossils? And then abiogenesis, and I know my God is real because I had a personal experience. And they're just seminar posters. They're not listening. They're not there for dialogue. They're not there for any meaningful reason, except they're going to feel, it's almost like saying, I'll pray for you. It's a way for them to feel like they've been a champion for God, but they don't really have to do anything of substance. Well, that's just not going to be tolerated. The thinking atheist community on Facebook especially does not exist as a debate arena. It's not there so that anybody and everybody can come by and act and say anything they want or wish. And in that regard, I really wanted to protect it for the people who are free thinkers. Even those who are believers are welcome. It's not a hostile environment for the religious, as long as they're coming in to have some meaningful discussion. We've had people come in and ask a few questions and for even challenge, legitimate challenge, and having a meaningful, meaty conversation. I'm okay with that. That's great. But the people who literally just suffocate the page with the platitudes, they just pop at those sweet little burble candies like Pez. I'm not required to allow them to dominate a page that is not designed for them. It's not designed for them. It's designed for you, for me, for us. It's a safe haven. It's a place where you can go and get sane. I get people all the time say, I'm in a religious community. I'm dragged to church every Sunday. My spouse is religious. My parents are religious. Everywhere I go, it's God, 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 God. At the office, they're hanging little crosses off of everybody's cubicles, and I'm about to shoot myself in the head, and then I go to your site. and we have some infidel humor, and we exchange ideas, and they post a video from TED Talks, and we salute Christopher Hitchens, and we do some other stuff where I feel like I can breathe again. That's the purpose. So to hear Devin, not to totally derail the show, but I wanted to just draw a circle around that. I will, as long as I can, and with every fiber of my being, will do my very best to make sure that environment, especially the Facebook one, remains a safe haven where you can go and you can chill and you can enjoy yourself. And there may be the occasional theist comment and challenge and even a heated argument. But the seminar posters, the ones who come by and decide they're just going to drive by with a bumper sticker and act holier than thou and distract you and I from really enjoying the page, bye. No apology, no regrets. You do not belong here. There's plenty of religious internet activity, plenty of forums, plenty of pages. Trust me, there are plenty of places for you to land. Bye. And don't let it hit you where evolution split you. Let's go back to the phones, shall we? Let's see. Area code 208. You're on the Thinking Atheist podcast. Who's this?
Hi, Seth. This is Alex.
Alex, glad you called. What's going on?
It's kind of a horrible story, just to warn people in advance, but I was abused by my mother my entire life. My entire life at this point being 20 years.
Wow.
She was Roman Catholic, and I think that played into it a little bit, but...
You think she was abusive because she was Catholic?
No, but... She didn't feel guilty for some reason. I always thought that was a weird contradiction. But she would throw me into walls and starve me, and then I wouldn't get medical attention, and scream at me and rip my hair out, and all sorts of wonderful, horrible things like that. And that's part of why I became an atheist, is because no God, or at least the God that my friends told me existed, would have ever allowed that to happen to me. I couldn't even believe that this loving God that I prayed to up until I was 11, that I prayed every day, God save me, please save me from this, get me out of here, God kill me so that I don't have to do this anymore, never came. He never showed up. So it was either there was no God, or somehow I deserved this, because as raised Roman Catholic, there's a whole lot of you deserve it in that particular branch, but I could not handle it, and that's why I became an atheist. And now I'm trying to deal without God with PTSD and an eating disorder and hallucinations because of the PTSD and depression and anxiety, and then I get these freaking Christians who is like, oh, I'll pray for you, just put your faith in Jesus. And I'm like, I did that already. Jesus never came for me. Jesus never helped me, not once. So that's kind of my story.
Alex, I'm not at all qualified to really get into the what's and where's and why's. So let's just talk like real people, okay?
Okay.
How old are you now?
20.
And you still carry very deep scars from the experience?
Yep.
Some might say that your rejection of Catholicism or God in a broader sense is... And your embracing of atheism is simply a product of the abuse that you suffered. Did you reject Catholicism or God outright, or Jesus, because of the abuse, or did you in any way, outside of the fact that God didn't help me, was there any other, did you put the pieces together and decide that it just made more sense, or is this merely a reaction to the pain you felt?
Oh, it was also at the time that I rejected God. I was at the age where they started teaching us about evolution, and I started reading about evolution, and I found Carl Sagan, and so it wasn't just the abuse. There was also what I was learning in school going on. Okay, well that makes me feel better, because honestly, if you had sort of springboarded out of religion into non-belief merely as a reaction to this horrific abuse that you suffered, I would be concerned. I would be concerned that you could then bounce all over the place. It wouldn't be an action as much as of a reaction.
Do you have joy in your life? Do you have friends? Do you have things that bring you fulfillment, that help move you forward?
I do now. I have relationships and my friends and college and my therapist, yay, and that's helped a lot, but all of the psychological manipulation made it hard to keep going, especially when most of my friends, again, were, I'll pray for you, like, which does what exactly?
Many of them probably had no idea what to do with you. I mean, they were thinking, this is over my head, so I'll pray for you as the escape hatch. They say, I'll pray for you, and then they shut down. It's a very heavy thing. Of course, my next thought is, why didn't they contact the authorities? I mean, why were their steps not taken? I'm sure that's a very complex thing, but I think a lot of times believers just check out. They are ill-prepared to deal with crises like this, and so the I'll pray for you is their escape hatch to get clear.
And I'll pray for you, so I'm also disabled, so they'll do the same thing. I'll pray for you instead of help me do something, but that's why I have issues with that phrase. And I know that, abuse is not something a whole lot of people know it to deal with, but at the same time, it's not like, I'll pray for you, if you need anything, come talk to me. No, it was just, I'll pray for you and let Jesus into your life. So
yeah, they're giving you the bumper sticker, and you're thinking, what the hell am I going to do with this? But now you've got people who you can relate to, and you have a professional that you're confiding in, someone who can guide you through this particular journey, and you're doing better, right?
Yeah, I'm not going to say I'm doing great, but I'm doing much better. And I tell the top I got a show, and it's just, it's hard because there was, when I was religious, there was a support structure. There was an in-place scaffold that I could cling to that was,
Sure, it's harder doing it by yourself, right? Now you're working without a net. Now everything
I don't have anything to fall back on. I don't have that community, I think, is part of the problem. And I notice this in a lot of my other non-believing friends. We have talked about this, about how we kind of have our own community, but it's not the same.
Well, there's no reason. I honestly feel like that a reality-based path out of trauma, whether it's emotional, physical, whatever, I really think it's the healthier path out. I mean, Darrel Ray was articulating that as well. And honestly, I mean, I don't want to blow smoke up your ass here, but I really don't see any reason why a happy, fulfilled, rich, relational adult life cannot be yours. It's probably a long road, and your therapist, your professional, can speak to that much better than I can. But I don't see any reason why you who have so much to offer. You're so well spoken. I mean, I'd like to hear, next time we talk, I'd like to hear more of a smile in your voice and just know. But regardless, remember that even though you have eschewed religion and walked away, and you've got a lot of baggage with you, that there's a tremendous community of people here, many of whom who can relate to you specifically, who get you. And the tide for reason, I think, is rising. And you have more people who have your back than you probably realize. Okay? Does that help to hear? I hope so.
It really does. It gets hard sometimes.
Well, you're not alone. And I wish you the best. And if you get a chance here, in a couple months, drop me an email at seth@thethinkingatheist.com. And let me know how you're doing, okay? I really do want to know, Alex.
All right. Thanks, Seth.
All right. You take care of yourself. I had an email from Alicia. Alicia said, recently my son's father died very unexpectedly. It was a huge shock to his family and to me and our son. His family's pretty religious. His grandmother is Seventh-day Adventist. His mother is pretty spiritual. They have an extremely hard time coping with a young man, only 36, dying so suddenly when they were still around. His grandmother's 85. My son has done amazingly well. He's accepted death and without the idea of reward or perhaps more likely punishment for his father, and no expectations of future reuniting. He's relishing memories and talking, keeping the memories alive and able to appreciate the beauty in life and live as most 10-year-olds do, every day to the fullest. It saddens me to see how stricken and clinging my ex's family is, how much they talk about him looking down and posting as if he can read his Facebook page. It's sad, depressing, and disturbing. However, I'm so proud of my son for his strength. It's helped me, too, since at one point I did love the man who fathered my child, and he'd become over time a good friend. He met my new husband and invited us for cookouts regularly. I signed his marriage certificate and observed his wedding with his new wife. His loss hurt. I cried for many days, but the realization that it happens and that he's gone, there's nothing left, that actually makes it so much easier to cope with. Alicia, thanks for the letter. Todd on Facebook said, depression. Not only did losing religion help free me from guilt that was causing depression, but it also showed me a much powerful resource, my fellow humans. They came through for me in tough times in a way that God never did. Casey wrote in and said, I was deployed to Iraq with the U.S. Army in 2003 and was wounded in a roadside bombing in 2004. After coming home, I was fighting chronic pain and severe PTSD, depression, and anxiety. I kept praying for help or strength to feel normal again, but obviously nothing changed. I finally woke up one morning and realized the only person who could change my situation was me. I devoted myself to the hard work of extensive counseling and physical therapy. It was actually walking away from God that gave me the strength and awareness to work for myself. I realized that the horrors of war that I had endured had nothing to do with God. And it's just that this world can be crazy, messed up place. Reality gives me more strength and courage to endure than any God ever could. There are some organizations in place. Darrel Ray and I were talking about Alcoholics Anonymous and how they have a higher power as part of their 12-step program. Now, I haven't seen the program from the inside out, so some are certainly more qualified to speak about it than me. But I know that there are many non-faith-based organizations that help people beat addiction. One of those is Secular Organizations for Sobriety, and they have chapters all around the country. And I think you can probably just Google search it. Sometimes it's under SOS, just S.O.S. Secular Organizations for Sobriety. And they are absolutely deity free. It's not about put your trust in this floating invisible being who loves you, but let's deal with the root problems and let's overcome them. I know some people have online forums for secular men and women dealing with grief. I know there's a Godless Grief forum. It's godlessgrief.com. And I know there are a lot of other resources out there. Those resources do exist, and they're certainly worth finding. Area code 775. Thanks for waiting. You're on the Thinking Atheist podcast. Who is this?
Hi, Seth. This is Kitty, the shaman's fiance from last week.
I am so glad you called back. I felt kind of bad after the show because I had a lot of fun with Wes, your fiance, the shaman, and I hope at the end of the day he knew I was just shaking his tree, right? I thought he was a great call and I really enjoyed him, but at the end I thought, I was pretty hard on the guy.
He knew. He was actually watching the chat and saw people in chat literally shouting, "More shaman, more shaman."
They love
and
that.
even on the YouTube page, the same thing.
They love him, and he was a great caller. But at the end of the day, I listened to the show back, which I try to do afterward just to sort of make sure I didn't screw it up. And I heard it, and I thought, wow, I was I hope I wasn't a jerk to that guy. So, wrap your arms around him, tell him hi and thanks. That I didn't.
He's listening in the other room.
Okay, good. Well, I know that you had shared part of your story, right? You had lost a child. Is that why you're calling today?
Yeah, that was exactly why I was calling in today. Because like I said last week, we lost our daughter. It was probably about, I want to say 3 days before she was due to be born. There was no indication. The pregnancy went absolutely perfect. I woke up one morning and was sitting there, and it's like there's nothing, no movement, no nothing. And we got to the hospital, and they're like, "We're sorry, she's gone." The next day, I went back to the hospital to give birth. They wanted to do a C-section because she was breech. I said no. I'm going to have this baby naturally. I don't want a scar to remember the incident by. And like we said last time, I'm completely atheist. He's shamanistic, so he still had his belief to fall back on. I had nothing. So for me to cope and overcome the whole situation, I actually spent my time remembering how strong I needed to be for everybody else around us who was grieving. I took my time to grieve while I was in the hospital. I held her. I had pictures taken. And then that was it. They took her away. We had her cremated. So about a week and a half after I lost her, we brought her home in a box. Both he and I wear pendants that have her ashes in them. I'm not still fully over it. It's been 4 years now. But for me, focusing around everybody else and not just myself, I had a huge support structure. My best friend who's in California, I'm going to be seeing her for our wedding, she's highly religious. The first words out of her mouth were, "If there's anything I can do for you, let me know." Never once did she utter those words, "I will pray for you."
And it meant so much more, right? It was a human, person-to-person gesture that said, I want to be part of your solution. I'm not casting it off on my invisible friend.
Yeah. Every day after I got out of the hospital, she called me to make sure I was okay. My mother, also very religious, was planning to come down the week after. She talked to the airline and the hotel. They switched all of her stuff around, no charge, when she told them what had happened. My husband, or my fiance, I call him my husband because we've been together so long, but we were in Fallon, Nevada, and the closest airport is in Reno. It's an hour away. He made the trip from Fallon to Reno and back in 30 minutes, escorted by cops.
Wow.
To bring her up here. His aunt, who I've only known for the time that I've been out here, took her entire lunch break to come sit with me at the hospital, holding my hand the entire time. My mom sat there when she got there, held my hand the entire time. Our big brother, who's the guy who actually got us together, came to the hospital, held my hand the entire time. He was there with us the night that I went in for induction. My support system was huge, but the only thing that I could think of was being strong for all of them, because I knew if they saw me break, there was nothing that was going to keep them from breaking. And if I hadn't had them there to focus on, I have no clue what I would have done, because I know there's no God that's going to hold my hand as I sat there delivering my daughter. There was no God to welcome her home. She lives with us here in our place in Reno in a box. That is where she will always be, close to us.
Did you have anyone come to you and give you the platitudes, give you the bumper stickers, say the sort of the empty, vacuous religious catchphrases?
Not a single person.
Wow. So is it because they knew you were a non-believer and they were respecting your wishes?
They were. Even the hospital, because a lot of the hospitals, when people run into situations like this, they'll have a pastor come in. The only people that would come into my hospital room, besides my family and friends who were able to make it out there, were the nurses. And one of the nurses there had just suffered the same type of loss. Not once did she say, "I will pray for you." Not once did she say, "God has a plan." I have friends online in a game that we play called Second Life. They were all just as excited as we were about this baby, because we planned to let everybody know who she was. And instead of us getting "I'm so sorry, God has a plan for you guys, God had a reason for this," what we ended up getting meant more to us than anything that anybody of any religion could have said. Our friends got together, and on the sim that we played on, they created a memorial statue for her.
Wow.
Having a huge support system of people, regardless of whether they're right there next to you, 2 states away, or spread all over the world, is more healthy than tricking yourself into believing that God has a plan.
These are human tragedies, and they require human solutions. Huh?
Yes, they do. They really, really do. Because the hollowed out, I'll pray for you, is like Joe said earlier in the letter that you read first. What are you going to pray for? Are you going to pray that I'm going to magically get over this immense amount of pain? Are you going to pray that I'm going to see my daughter again in the next life when there is no next life? Those prayers are meaningless. Being there for the person who is suffering means more to them than God has a plan.
You and Wes are about to make it official, aren't you?
Mm-hmm.
What's the date? Have you set a date yet?
It's August 25th.
That's just around the corner. So you've got good things going, right?
Yeah, we've got real good things going. I mean, my mom and my dad, they're split. They're going to be in town for this. My granddad, who's still alive, is going to be in town for this. Both of my dad's brothers are planning. My best friend, my brother, some of my family members, and some of my friends from outer state are planning to come for this.
I'm excited for you two. Now that you've called, I've spoken to, either you or Wes for 2 consecutive shows. I feel strangely bonded to you now. But you're both precious people. I wish you the best for August. Thank you for being so transparent and sharing your story. If the looks of the chat room, and I'm only able to monitor sort of in a passive way because I'm a man and do not multitask for that reason. But I mean, people love you and people really respond. And you've articulated so well that, we've got to be here for each other because that's all we got. That's so well said.
That is all we have is each other.
You
and
did
thank
good.
You so much. Thank you so much.
Congratulations to
you
you and Wes, okay?
Thanks, Seth.
Take care of yourself.
You too. Bye-bye.
Wow. The loss of a child, I can't imagine. I've said it many times. It's just, wow. Karen wrote me a letter, said, Seth, I found you only recently. I viewed several videos and listened to a few podcasts. Entertaining, informative, enlightening, and comforting. What you showed me is coming out as an atheist is a lonely decision, and especially so when you joined a church to make friends or feel a part of something. I didn't grow up with religion, met a Mormon boy when I was 14, so I went to his church. Took their lessons, was baptized, but I never believed their doctrine. That lasted a year. But throughout my life, I was always searching for the meaning of life, why we're born, why we have to die. Is there more to life than this earthly existence? In 2008, I entered a non-denominational church, was welcomed warmly right away, so the hook was in. As I started to attend small group Bible study and became more familiar with the Bible, this is when I had questions. And as you know, you are never to question. The short story is that I had to leave the church because I questioned some of their teachings, and I was accused of being led by Satan. Now we forward to October 2009 when I found an apostolic church. I had no clue what they were about. Day one, somebody started babbling behind me. Later, I was to learn this is speaking in tongues. Pastor got me into private Bible study with him and his wife. This was all good until the end when I was told I needed to be baptized in Jesus' name according to Acts 2:38 and not Matthew 28:19, the Trinitarian formula. This group is a Jesus-only oneness apostolic group, and that they expected me to speak in tongues once I rose up out of the water. Heck no. It was all downhill from my baptism until I ran for the hills in May 2011. For me, I was rejecting their doctrines, not them. I came to love some of the women there and made close bonds with a couple of them, but they would have nothing to do with me after I left. They said they loved me, but I heard there was to be a baby shower for the pastor's daughter. I expressed my desire to attend. That evening, the pastor called me to uninvite me, saying that, quote, I need to protect my family. He further said, you can't reject our doctrine and expect to come to a party and play patty cake with us. We would need to sit down and talk. To which I replied, that will never happen. And I hung up. Here it is all this time later, and I'm so angry and hurt still. If I can feel this way, how must it be for those like yourself who led a Christian life for years and years only to be shunned? I expect there are thousands of so-called believers out there who go along to get along. I was never like that and never will be, and it's a lonely existence. I've always been the odd woman out. You say the word atheist and you get looks like you just turned into a monster. But thank you for what you do, and thank you for your website and Facebook page. Karen, thanks for the message. Well, I haven't been shunned by my family. My family and I love each other. We are, a few of my family members and I are in the process of driving each other crazy. You know, I mean, there's tension, and there may always be tension. I don't really know. This is foreign territory. But I do hear a lot of stories about people who their support mechanisms were inside the church. Even if they didn't buy the doctrine, their friends went there. Their mentors went there. The people they cared the most about went there. When they left the faith, they lost it all and felt like the entire net had just been pulled out from underneath them. They had nothing to fall back on. Area code 705. You're on the Thinking Atheist podcast. Who's this?
It's Dave.
I've got about 3 minutes. My apologies for the rush. What do you have for us today?
No, it's okay, Seth. I can't. I'm so flabbergasted that I got on.
No, I'm glad you made it in. I'm so glad you called.
I've been listening for a while to the podcast now, and it's just such a breath of fresh air, and it's really meant a lot, as I'm sure a lot of your listeners echo, and just really want to say thanks for it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you very much for listening.
I was raised in a traditional Catholic background. I'm up here in Northern Ontario in Canada, and it's quite a Catholic community that I live in. And I don't know, about 5 or 6 years ago, I guess I just sort of started looking at things, and sort of like Dan Barker said, just kind of made a mental tally sheet and found that there were far more things in the pros column that were, in the con column that ended up being in the pros column, and the scales were tipped very heavily one way, and it just sort of, once one thing didn't seem to make sense, a whole bunch of other things sort of fell apart, and it just was a natural progression. Around the same time, I was going through a divorce and sort of a bout with depression and whatnot, and sort of got the traditional answers about, that if you just put your trust in God, things will sort of, sort themselves out. And gradually, I think it just sort of came to realize that it was just sort of digging deep within myself and, relying on friends and that kind of thing, but certainly nothing supernatural, that I, managed to come out of it and sort of right my mindset, my worldview, and am happy and well-adjusted and, and trying to help others do the same, just in conversation, and trying to show people that, things of a religious nature and topics of that nature don't have to be scary or taboo to talk about, and shouldn't be hands-off. They should be subject to the same pressures of common sense and reason and conversation that anything else in our life is.
I see that as a common thread, too. People who come out or go through a journey, then, I went through a journey of apostasy, right, to non-belief. Mm-hmm. Now I feel compelled to try to help others. I'm throwing the lifeline out, going, let me give you a hand at, for what it's worth. There's something therapeutic about that. So thanks for the call. Forgive the last-minute nature of it, but I'm glad you squeezed into the show, and thanks for the kind words.
I hope I can meet you someday at a convention or something and keep up the good work.
My pleasure. My pleasure. So good to have you on the show. Thanks to everybody for your calls. My apologies for not being able to get to every single email. I would love to have shared every single one of them with you. Have a wonderful week. I'll see you next time on the Thinking Atheist Radio Podcast.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter. Watch dozens of original videos on the Thinking Atheist YouTube channel. And visit our website for resources, links, contact information, the editor's blog, and more. thethinkingatheist.com.